Hello, my friends! You are listening to the Joyful Telepathy podcast. I am your host, Kate Sitka, animal communicator and spirit medium. I serve curious and kind people from all over the world, and I love to tell you what the animals have to say and what our spirit friends are up to. To book a session with me, just click the link in this episode's description or visit tofinoPsychic.com. This podcast is a branch of my blog, psychicandtraining.com, where we have years of posts and discussions. We love to talk about life, death, and the afterlife, and most of all, I love to tackle your questions. You can email me anytime to tofinoPsychic@gmail.com. Now perk up your ears and park your fears. Here's this episode of the Joyful Telepathy podcast. Hi, my friends. Welcome back to the Joyful Telepathy podcast. I'm your host, Kate Sitka, and this week we've got something really special. I received really at the end of May, I received an amazing series of questions from one of my students, Carrie, who's given me permission to share some of these. She sent me 3 questions, one of which is, do animals have spirit guides? And I cannot believe I've never addressed this previously. So I asked Carrie if I could share this publicly. For those of you who are already enrolled in the class, you will have already received an email saying, hey, Kate has uploaded an update to your subscription. So for those of you that have received that email, that have already downloaded the update to the class, that's what this podcast is today. Now, I'm not going to be, obviously, I'm not going to be posting all of the answers, all of the class questions and answers publicly on the podcast, but I decided that this question was special, that I was going to do it for this first question that I addressed, and I am going to answer Carrie's other 2 questions as time allows here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to record my answer to her other 2 questions, and I'm just going to upload it to the class. So those of you who are enrolled in the class, you will receive the email. You'll receive that update automatically. And if you have any trouble receiving your updates, please feel free to send me an email. I am still learning how to use this platform. So, I haven't had any issues, with it yet so far, but whenever I'm doing something, for the first time on a platform, this is the first time that I am uploading an update. So I'm not going to assume it's going to go perfectly. So if you need some help, please feel free to email me to ask for help. And I will be sure to solve whatever problem that is for you. So that's what's going to happen with all of the future questions. All of the future class questions, for students that send in their questions, after they have gone through the audio course, Telepathic Communication with Animals and Spirit. Students are invited to send in questions, and I will be answering the questions just like I do in this podcast here, and I'm going to be uploading those answers to the private subscription feed that all of the students have access to. So that is what's going on. For those of you who have not yet enrolled in Telepathic Communication with Animals and Spirit, and you are interested in learning, you're interested in what is going on there and what I am teaching, and you're enthusiastic about expanding your own spiritual perception, your own abilities, you're interested in exploring all of that, you can head on over. You can enroll in that class now. I'm going to put a link in this episode's description. And if you have any questions about the class, please feel free to email me. You can always email me to tofinoPsychic@gmail.com. So I am going to go ahead and pass this over to my past self so that you can listen to my answer to Carrie, my student's amazing question. Do animals have spirit guides? I hope you enjoy it. Hi, my friends. How are all the wonderful students doing out there? I have heard back from a few of you. I'm really grateful and surprised and impressed by how many people have taken up the course. And I'm really looking forward to the one-to-one mentoring sessions. I've got a couple of them booked. And that's really exciting for me because I love teaching. I had an amazing time with Megan. Megan and I are going to have an ongoing relationship, professional relationship going forward as we continue the mentoring and as she starts to explore and grow on her own. And I'm looking forward to doing the same thing with you folks, with the folks that are listening to this, the folks that have enrolled in the class. Now, this file you're listening to right now, if you're one of the first group of people who enrolled in the class in April or May or June, you will know that this file that you're listening to right now was uploaded after the complete class. It's at the end of June. And first of all, I've gotten married for the interim. So I have been pretty much off the internet for about a month while celebrating the marriage to my partner of 11 years and being with her family and being with my family and our friends from out of time. So it's been a wonderful, joyous intermission. And I'm really stoked. I'm really happy to get back to working with the class, working with you folks. And I received these questions last month, actually, and I just wasn't able to address them immediately because of how crazy my schedule got. But I have saved them, and I want to thank Carrie for these questions. I also want to thank Carrie for her patience because I really wanted to get back to her much sooner than I ended up doing. But she was very understanding with everything that was going on around the wedding and how that kind of takes over your life for a little bit. And I honestly wanted to save it so that I could do a really good job. Now, Carrie has some really unique questions. And honestly, one of these questions I can't believe I didn't think of addressing on my own, this is one of the reasons why I love teaching, because when you're in this student-teacher relationship, it's a bit different than the, writer, blog reader kind of relationship. I do get some questions from my wonderful blog reader friends and the podcast friends, but when someone is really actively, proactively engaged in learning, there's an extra energy that students bring to this relationship. And the result is that I expand and grow because I'm taking part of your expansion and growth, this is the big payoff for me. This is why I really love teaching. So I'm going to share this first question with the podcast people as well. So I'm going to post this out onto the Joyful Telepathy podcast, and then I'm going to keep the remaining 2 questions just for the class, just for those who have enrolled in the course. And I want to encourage everyone who's taking the course, please feel free to email me your questions. If you want to even send me a voice recording, you can feel free to do that. You can just hit record on your smartphone. Most people will have a voice memo app or something similar. And you can email that to me and I will play your voice if you would like to participate, if you would like to share your voice with the other people in this course. So I'm looking forward to all of the work that we're going to be doing in the coming year. So first things first, I'm going to address this very first question. I addressed this immediately because it was such a fascinating question. And now I kind of wish that I had saved it because my cat Rupert immediately came forward. And I've invited him to come in and have this discussion with me again in the office here, but he's not interested in repeating the discussion. I'm hoping that as he hears me talking about it, that he will engage, or maybe Mikey will come in. But for now, I'm going to share with you what he shared with me. So the question is, do animals have spirit guides? Now, this is such an amazing question, and I can't believe that I didn't think of it myself, because I have addressed previously that species generally will have an oversoul, and depending on the relationship, the intensity of the relationship with a species and either humanity or their nature or their relationship with nature and what they need to do in order to survive, then sometimes they will have an oversoul specific to a particular breed or a region in that area. So for the first thing that comes to mind is Bengali tigers. There are Siberian tigers and Bengali tigers. And then there's many mixed breeds. What you would typically see in a circus or in an unfortunate roadside zoo, those are generally mixed breed tigers that actually do nothing for conservation. They would not be the same species as what naturally occurs in the wild. These are big cats that have been bred for circuses and for private ownership, and not something that naturally evolved in nature, although they are beautiful animals. So the oversoul of the Bengali tiger is different than the oversoul of the Siberian tiger. They have completely different environments that they've adapted to, and this differs in having a one-to-one spirit guide, because many wild animals, depending on what they're doing, I'm not going to make a generalization about all animals everywhere. Right now I'm going to specifically talk about wild animals who come in and their purpose is to participate in the ecosystem, to experience the joy and the just the wildness, the freedom and the sensory experience, this joyous sensory experience, which includes the full spectrum of emotion and physical sensation, from adrenaline and joy to, when a hunt is successful, to hunger, disease and injury that they sometimes experience. This is all a part of the life experience, and the consciousness of a wild animal who comes into this wild body comes in for the purpose of living this out and participating in this environment, and this is an enriching experience for this consciousness. Those individual animals don't necessarily need or have individual one-to-one spirit guides. Part of the reason why we need spirit guides is because we are, our life form is so challenging. We are many times cut off from our instincts. Many of us are cut off from the intuitive wisdom of our ancestors who are in spirit. Our lives as humans are incredibly complex when compared to wild animals. Humans have complex societies. I always kind of get a little caught up when I try to explain the difference between animals and humans, because animals do have complex social societies. Animals have social hierarchies. Some animals migrate further than humans do in their over the course of their entire lives. But animals' relationships with their bodies and their instinct is so much deeper than the human experience. Animals have less abstract thought. Not all animals even make logical conclusions, although many do. But animals don't have this complex series of thoughts that for humans has resulted in this incredibly complex society and all of the advantages and challenges that we are facing in our modern world. As well, the way that animals relate to their physical experience, it's different than humans. Animals typically have shorter lifespans, and so the stakes for them physically are not as high. For humans, we spend, at least the first 10 years of our life being utterly dependent on the adults in our environment for our survival. And you can really see this in children who are cared for and supported versus children that are neglected. And those first 10 years can really determine what a human is, I don't want to say capable of, but what a human's adult experience is going to be, because those first 10 years affect so much. For an animal, many species, now again, I want to acknowledge that There are many species in the wild that live longer than humans, but I'm going to stick to, say, wild mammals. We'll stick to the example of Bengali tigers, for example. They do not live nearly as long as humans live, and wild animals do grow up very quickly. While some long-lived animals can take several years to really meet maturity, I'm trying to think, and I don't think of, right now I cannot think of any other species that takes 10 years to be able to mature enough to really survive on their own, to begin to function. And we can all agree that a 10-year-old, this is not close to a human adult yet. Most children have not begun to hit physical maturity at 10 years old. I'm just talking about the ability to feed themselves, make their own food, and and survive, the very basics of survival. What I'm trying to do is contrast how long it takes humans to mature and how intensely human children need this sort of support and protection. And we have, while I'm going to talk about spirit guides a little bit more, I'm going to stick with the animal theme here. But we have, all children have additional support and protection. Because if human children didn't have this additional support and protection, we would lose the majority of our children. I think that most of us can recall incidents in our childhood when we were faced with a life or death situation, and perhaps as children we didn't, maybe we weren't aware of it, and maybe we weren't frightened at the time. But every person I've talked to has had a moment where they felt, they were pulled back from traffic, or in my case, I was riding a bus, or rather I was riding a bike, and I was hit by a city bus while riding my bike, and my bike was pulled under the bus and mangled and twisted horribly, and it was unrideable after that. But I was somehow thrown clear, and I just had some bumps, bruises, some scrapes as a result of hitting the ground nearly 20 feet in front of the bus. And from a physics point of view, it makes zero sense why that would have happened, why my bike would have been sucked under the bus, and why I would have been thrown so far clear. And my partner has a story about being prompted by a voice to stop before she inattentively walked out into traffic. And I know many people who, particularly in their childhoods, either avoided an accident or were in an accident and avoided serious harm. This kind of thing, it happens all the time. Often it's relatives that are watching closely, and always children have special guides, special angels, special specialist nannies, spirit nannies that keep an eye on kids to work to help keep them safer in this on this planet that is just so random and so dangerous at times. Now, animals who are in the wild will go to a Bengali kitten who's being cared for by her mother. A Bengali kitten right away is left alone for long periods of time in her den while mom goes out hunting, and then mom will bring back some food. So this kitten might wander out and about. Curiosity starts to get to them pretty quickly, and they need that stimulation. So does that individual kitten have a spirit guide? Well, I am not going to make a generalization about every Bengali kitten in the wild, because each individual animal is different. However, the Bengali kitten has less of a need for that one-on-one keeping you safe. The Bengali kitten has some instincts that are going to be at play. Depending on the personality she was born with, she may be bold or timid, or somewhere in the middle, fairly cautious. She is going to have some instincts that are going to encourage her to explore her environment and to build her muscles and to develop her senses. And she's going to have some survival instincts that are going to help hold her back. You can see the difference between wild animals and domestic animals, because domestic animals that have evolved and developed under human care, where humans have been individually overseeing them and ensuring that the animals survive their infancy to become adolescents at, we're going to say 6 months old to a year old, which is when most mammals experience their adolescence. If a species such as dogs, many domestic dogs, they have been protected. Their babies have been protected by humans. And so domestic animals begin to lose the instincts, because the instincts that keep them safe from the time that they were born, because they have less of a need for that intense connection to keep them alive. I'm going to go off on another quick little tangent here and just state an observation that I've made over the years, where there are several different cultures out here, First Nations folks, where they have a tradition of sending future spiritual leaders out into the wilderness for, I have been told, up to 10 years. And so an individual going into the bush and living by themselves for 10 years, this is kicking in their survival instincts on an incredibly amplified level. And it's certainly not only First Nations people who do this. You can look at other cultures. You can look at the traditions of monks going off to live in groups or by themselves. The tradition of a hermit or of a mysterious witch that people are afraid of and fascinated by, who goes off to live by herself. Sometimes people who, I've discussed this previously, who are very spiritually sensitive, seek out that kind of isolation, because being sensitive to the thoughts and feelings and energy of modern society, or even a busy medieval city, that feels abrasive and uncomfortable to people that are very sensitive. So, sensitive people and, many spiritually sensitive folks tend to naturally want to isolate. And a part of that, it's also running parallel to when we move off by ourselves, especially into nature, and we kick in our survival instincts, when we're putting ourselves into positions where we have to be completely self-sufficient, we, out of necessity, start to create a spiritual connection, which is one of the things that I enjoyed so much about camping. Now I have an instinct, probably of a middle-aged lady, to not take the physical risks that I used to take by challenging myself in the wilderness and either going out by myself as I used to do as a teenager, or going out in a small group the way I used to do in my 20s. Now my instinct is to find solitude, but find a safe solitude. Wild animals are born into this connectedness, into this awareness. They're in survival mode 100% of the time from the time they were born, and their mother had to leave them alone so she could go out to hunt, which happens when they're just a few days old. Mother's got to go out and fuel herself and come back and nurse her babies, and she's got to go out and hunt and bring that food back. So the babies are left on their own, usually in a den, or for longer periods of time as the babies begin to mature and explore on their own. The babies are in that survival mode, in that plugged in place where their senses are alive and their instincts are completely plugged in. Now, with wild animals as well that have been born into this region over and over, the instinct it's not just physical, it's not just genetic. A lot of instinct is, but it's also spiritual, because this Bengali kitten, this is not her first time being a Bengali kitten. She has likely reincarnated into this same species many hundreds of times, possibly thousands of times, because this is often how a wild consciousness will work, because they enjoy participating in the ecosystem. And so when the body of a mature tiger dies, then she is reborn into the new body of a kitten, and the environment is immediately familiar. Those of us who have ever had a sense of deja vu, when visiting a place they'd never been before, but it all feels familiar. I certainly felt like that in Denmark. And it was strange walking around in Copenhagen that everything, those streets hadn't changed for hundreds of years, and everything felt very familiar. I even felt, as I was walking down the street, looking down at these ancient cobblestones and going, I feel like I've seen this exact formation of stones. I felt like I knew where I was going, and I could look up and go, oh, well, that bakery is new. That bakery used to be over there. And it was a really interesting experience. And I think that a lot of people have experienced that, feeling extremely familiar and at home in a place that they've never been. Well, for a wild animal, that's normal. That is typically what they do, is they're going to be reborn into the same, at least a similar environment, but often the same region. We have, in wild animals, we see a spirit consciousness of a particular species reincarnating along the same or similar genetic lines in the same geographic area. And so they're born not only with the instinct and the physical genetic tie to these natural behaviors that they need to perform in order to survive, but also this innate spiritual knowledge. So bottom line is that many wild animals are born completely equipped to survive, to manage on their own, and don't need that individual one-to-one attention of a spirit guide. And so an oversoul of a particular subspecies is more than enough. And the oversoul functions more as a collective unconscious. When for example, a Bengali tiger is, many of them are under enormous pressure right now because they're losing habitat. And so when they are pushed from this region where they've incarnated many hundreds of times, a region that they intuitively and instinctively know how to glean a living from, where the best hunting spots are, where the water comes, where to go when that water dries up seasonally. All of these things are all in there. And so when human development pushes these animals out of the environment that their bodies were programmed to survive in, now they need to access the knowledge, the collective unconsciousness, as they get pushed into other tigers' territories, as they have to learn to hunt maybe different animals. Perhaps we're looking at water buffalo instead of smaller prey that they might have been used to. Smaller forest deer, for example. I'm not sure if there's forest deer in India, but I'm trying to. It's these little images that I get as I'm talking. So I'm seeing like a more fawn-sized 4-footed animal, and then seeing, well, now here's this big water buffalo that I have to try to learn how to hunt. And there's that feeling of, I'm hungry, I'm starving, and I'm looking at this animal, and it's out in the water, and how do I hunt this animal? And that's when this collective unconscious, that's when the spirit oversoul intuitively becomes accessible to them. Because as an individual tiger who's been pushed into this new territory, who's deep in survival mode, looks at a water buffalo that they've never seen before, and then says, I need to wait until it's night because this animal comes ashore. I need to observe this animal. Even though I'm starving and can't wait 3 more days, I need to at least wait until night to observe this animal. Sometimes they will intuitively, because animals communicate telepathically all the time. And a tiger who doesn't necessarily see water buffalo babies is going to know that they're around if they're around. They'll pick up the mental imagery, just like I pick up mental imagery that animals share with me, a predator can pick up the mental imagery that their prey are sending back and forth and leaving around. They would also sense, there would be different smells, different, even different sounds, different, the subtleties of the water buffalo behavior changes when they have infants around. And some of that knowledge is going to be back in the species. Perhaps there was a genetic ancestor of this Bengali tiger who used to hunt in this very region before they moved deep into the forest. And that genetic memory is starting to stir, but it's that collective unconscious that combined with the telepathic communication, with the instinct, it all comes together. It's not just one thing, because animals don't define each way of knowing separately. They don't intellectually analyze, well, how do I know this? And do I really know this? They don't question themselves in that way. They don't agonize over things. They just simply know these things, and they don't think about why they know them. So when an individual is out of her element and is needing to quickly adapt to a new environment, that's when this oversoul, the knowledge that is stored within this oversoul, that's when that becomes accessible. And the animal doesn't need the one-to-one spirit guide whispering in their ears saying, wait until later, hunt the baby later, because the tiger already knows. Because that is their incarnation expertise. Their animals in so many ways are so much better at being incarnated than people. They don't struggle in a lot of the same ways that humans struggle. That's why humans really need that individual help. Now, do animals have spirit guides? Some of them do. I had never thought about it before. I had never even thought to ask. So the very first animal who I asked was my cat Rupert. Now, I've invited Rupert to come and have the conversation with me again, because this happened very quickly as I was discussing it at night. I kind of wish I'd grabbed a portable recorder or something to get it live. But Rupert, he's not around right now. He's like, you just tell them, because he already told me. So I'm going to tell you what Rupert told me. Rupert says that yes, some animals do have individual spirit guides. And he showed me two things immediately, at the same time. So one of the things that he showed me was his own, I think I've spoken of this before. It's like the Temple of Cats. It's this place. When I initially visualized this Temple of Cats, which Sunshine first told me about, I assumed that it was a place that was built by humans or cared for by humans, because these are domestic cats that we're talking about. But Rupert corrected me and he said, no, this is our place of our creation. And it shows as a triangle to me, but it's a natural, there's this cat on the other side. The cats don't need humans to do anything for them. They can visualize, they can create their own building just through their own desire for it. And for some reason, it tends to translate to me as a temple. But what Rupert showed me was what matters in this. It's a non-physical cat temple, but it's best explained in physical terms. Because when you understand that this is all, when they don't have bodies, it's a different consciousness that exists without a body doesn't rely on static physical forms for its experience. So Rupert was showing me what matters, the parts that matter in this cat temple is that there's the sensation of warmth, and not of a dry warmth, but of a radiating warmth coming out of a rock. And the sense of sunlight radiating down, and a dryness, but with a floral and a grassy scent. And some of them do have, now it's funny because as I'm visualizing this again, I do get the sense that there are humans there for some of them, but that these humans don't live there. So this place, this temple of cats, it's a place that's accessible for cats who enjoy it. And all of the cats who are there have all incarnated as domestic cats as cats that have lived around felines. We don't have lions hanging out there. We have, it's like it's an environment that's been tailored to them. It has this feeling of church, really. Like they're there. There's everything that they need. There's fun. There's a sense of they can go hunting. There's mice. There's birds. There's bats. There's beautiful sunrises and sunsets. There's water trickling down. There's warm grass. There's people to pet them, but the people aren't intrusive. And this is a place where many of them go to recuperate after they've had a life living with humans. The life purpose of wild animals versus domestic animals can be very different. When an animal consciousness decides to participate in human development, or for the sake of their own development and expansion, they want to start to interact with humans as a domestic animal, their lives immediately become more complex. Their incarnation experience becomes more complex because humans are complex. Rupert was showing me that for cats such as himself, often they do have spirit guides who help them to cope with the people, or who help them to cope with the extreme and rapidly changing environments that they sometimes find themselves in as a result of living near and around humans. The life of a domesticated animal can be extremely varying and complex, especially for cats, dogs, and horses, like animals that are working animals who live with humans and who have a lot of bodily autonomy. Animals, for example, animals such as horses, depending on their job, if they're a trail horse, they may change hands. They may change owners many times throughout their lifetime. Same thing if they're a racehorse. If they're a racehorse, they may be put on trucks or boats or airplanes and have their their environments change completely as their owners change, as they're bought and sold around the world. Although with racehorses, their job can remain fairly consistent, but sometimes their careers are very, very short and can change drastically depending on how successful they are as a racehorse. For farm animals, for food animals, their lives are depressingly short and similar. From what Rupert was showing me, many domestic food animals don't have individual spirit guides when their lives are so short and so restricted. But we don't want to generalize because it's all individual. Because there are occasionally you will get an animal, even a food animal, where their intelligence, their consciousness has ramped up, and they come in with a life purpose other than to be a food animal. A part of their purpose is to come in and bring human awareness to the occurrences in factory farming practices, because we need to adjust many of our practices for our food animals, and a part of the raising awareness in human culture is because individual intelligent animals who have come into their incarnation as a food animal with a raised consciousness and display behaviors that individuate them. Esther the Wonder Pig is an excellent example of an animal with a spirit guide. She was a food pig, and as a piglet, she ended up in the hands of the right humans, who passed her off into the hands of other humans who completely changed their lives to be able to give this food pig a home and to raise awareness for the consciousness and the intelligence of these animals. Now, Esther is an unusual animals. It's not every pig in factory farms or on farms in general who are as personable as Esther, who are as affectionate as Esther. And I haven't known hundreds of pigs, but I've known a couple of dozen. And I love pigs. They're one of my favorite animals, but they're not all like Esther. Esther is a really special individual. She was born with a purpose, and her humans came in to partner with her to live out this purpose. And we could not, Esther, she as an individual could not be, readily risked. So she continues to have spirit guides that help and that create these connections. Esther also had a health crisis last year at some point that has now resulted in a massive fundraiser that is going to buy an MRI machine for Guelph University that is going to be large enough to give large animals such as pigs and other farm animals MRIs, because this was a test that Esther needed during her health crisis that she simply couldn't access because there just isn't an MRI large enough in Canada for Esther to access. For the majority of animals who have very short structured lives in factory farms, they absolutely have protective oversouls. There are absolutely strong spiritual guardians who are working for the improvement of lives of especially animals that are subject to factory farms. But there's not the intensity of the one-to-one, because these animals just don't have a lot of variance in their life. They don't have a lot of choices really at all in their lives. And so the spiritual energy goes higher. It goes more collective rather than individual. So that's really the line that I'm trying to explain. One of the things that Rupert showed me was it depends very much on the complexity of an animal's life. And the first thing that Rupert said was, those animals that are directly involved in the lives of humans are much more likely to have an individual spirit guide. Now, the next thing that he said was so sweet. He said that Mikey's spirit guide is a cat mom. And that was so sweet, because spirit guides, when we tend to think of spirit guides, when we as humans talk about them spiritually, we often visualize human-esque guides. And, sometimes we'll have, relationships with them or understanding of their past lives, if our guides have had past lives. But with animals, I had never really thought about this. I'd never really thought of, well, who would be an animal spirit guide? And what Rupert immediately showed me was Mikey's spirit guide. Rupert's very aware of her because Mikey needs, he needs to never feel alone. And so he has the spirit guide presence who is like a big mom cat. And Rupert showed her to me immediately. And it feels like she's about 40 pounds. Like she's small for a big cat, but, not a domestic cat, she has a large energetic presence. She's very warm and comes through as purring, and immediately see the squinting eyes. And she looks a lot like Mikey. And there's this feeling that she's Mikey's spiritual mother, that is protecting him, because Mikey came through with a heightened innocence and a heightened vulnerability. And that's a part of what Mikey is experiencing in this life as Mikey. Previously, he was my first cat, Leo. And Mikey's I can see Leo coming through, especially as Mikey gets older. But Mikey's experience of this life is very heightened sensitivity. And this has nothing to do with him really being a ragdoll, because Rupert is his litter mate, and Rupert's experience of life is very different. Mikey he's emotionally sensitive as well as energetically sensitive, and Mikey needs the constant comfort of his spirit guide, mother cat, being with him. She's maybe, now when I say mother cat, I don't think that this is Mikey's actual, like his actual literal mother. That's the spiritual relationship that they have. She's his spiritual mother. That's the energy that she brings to this. It's a protective, loving, nurturing, comforting spiritual mother. And that's the support that he needed in this life. He's came through specifically for me. He was born into the breeder's home, which was very safe. Mikey has never known abuse or fear or uncertainty. And so he chose this opportunity to come in to experience an incredibly heightened sense, physical sense. So Mikey is the first one to see spirits around the house. He's the one that usually lets us know because he's staring up at the ceiling, following things around. He tends to startle even if he hears a loud noise from outside. So Mikey's senses are just cranked. He's a 10 out of 10 all the time. So he needs that comforting, constant spirit guide. And Rupert immediately showed me, this is Mikey's spirit guide. She's with him all the time. Now, when I asked Rupert, do you have a spirit guide? He says, nah, I don't need one. And then Rupert went on to explain that he didn't need a spirit guide because he has a heightened enough awareness of who he is spiritually and why he's here. Rupert knows exactly who he is. He's extremely sure of himself. He knows what his purpose is, and he doesn't need an intermediary, and he doesn't need the support. Rupert he's very confident. He has faith in himself. Rupert has incarnated as a domestic cat, many, many times. My wife now, Catherine, has part of her life contract was that she would always have white cats around her. And even though Rupert is he doesn't appear to be a white cat, ragdolls actually are all white cats. They have that. They have that genetic connection with Josephine, the common descendant of all ragdoll cats. Josephine was herself a white cat. So Rupert also was a white cat in his last life, as my wife's childhood cat. So this is Rupert's history. Rupert's incredibly confident, and Rupert chose to come in as a self-aware, very bold individual who knows exactly who he is and who doesn't experience much fear, really at all. His instinct when given anything new is to become bold and to challenge it, really. I brought him outside in my arms because I was talking with my neighbor, who she has her two dogs. She lives in the other side of the duplex, and she was in the front yard with her dogs, so I was saying hello to her dogs and having a conversation with her, and Rupert was ripping the weather stripping off of the front door because he wanted to join the conversation. So he's not allowed loose just outside. It's not safe for him, but I picked him up and held him in my arms and brought him outside to meet these two dogs, because I thought, well, if he sees these two giant dogs, one of whom is rather excitable, perhaps he will want to go back inside where it's safe, because that is certainly what Mikey would do if he caught a glimpse of them. Or if I was holding him, Mikey would immediately want down and back inside where it was safe. Rupert, however, wanted to challenge the dogs, not to bully, but his instinct was to move towards them. He doesn't naturally have a fear. This is something new, I better hold back and observe. His instinct is to be bold and to move forward. And because of this, he doesn't need the support of an individual spirit guide, as well, because he has such a heightened awareness of who he is spiritually. Rupert will talk about his past life. He'll talk about his last life as Snowball, Catherine's childhood cat. And every once in a while, he'll pull out this zinger where he'll talk about something that happened when he was Snowball. And I will say that to Catherine. Rupert says, when he was Snowball, this happened. The one incident that comes to mind is when Catherine moved out of the house. Catherine's mother got a Shih Tzu, and the puppy and Snowball had an altercation, and as a result, now remember, folks, this was decades ago, before we knew better. But the result of this altercation between Snowball and the puppy was that Snowball got declawed, and that was a traumatic experience for him. Now, I didn't know that this had happened to Snowball, but when Rupert told me, when he sees a Shih Tzu, he remembers the pain of being declawed and how unfair that was, and how that changed him for the rest of his life. It was so unfair to him, and he had to change the way that he walked, and his paw was always a little sore on the one side, and he couldn't defend himself in a way that he felt comfortable. So that, to him, that experience, that memory carried over into his opinion of Shih Tzus now. And that comes up when I was talking about, well, maybe we should get a Shih Tzu. We should get a Shih Tzu puppy, because I'm starting to get dog broody, y'all. I've been without a dog for a few years now, and I think it's getting to be time, especially now that I'm physically, I'm getting into better and better shape with each passing month. I'm ready for a dog again. So we've been discussing some options, and a Shih Tzu, I know that we could meet that breed of dogs' energy requirements, like exercise requirements, their stimulation requirements, all those things. But Rupert does not want one. And it's because he still remembers this past life experience. So Rupert is really his own spirit guide. He doesn't need an individual guide. Mikey does not remember his life as Leo. He honestly doesn't. He's such an innocent little boy, and it's so neat and joyful for me when Mikey starts to imitate some of the behaviors that Leo used to have. Like, he's still the same little individual in there, and I've had him for 3 years now. And with each passing year, sometimes like some of these behaviors come back. He's starting, whenever I eat at the table now Mikey's coming up and joining me and wanting to take part in me eating and being very involved in what I'm eating. And Leo used to do exactly that. Mikey is klutzy in kind of the same way Leo used to be. Mikey is starting to exhibit some of the same behavior on the couch that Leo used to exhibit. So that's really heartwarming, but Mikey has no consciousness of that. He's got no active memory of it. When I talk to Mikey, he doesn't remember being Leo, which was really surprising to me, because Leo and I were so close. But that is a choice that Leo's spirit consciousness made. He wanted to have this experience of perfect innocence and heightened sensitivity. And so I'm going to support him in that. Because I can feel energetically, I can feel that he is there. Mikey is his own individual. We can never expect a reincarnation of an animal to be a duplication. And both, it's so neat that we've got, of these two brothers who are incarnations, that Rupert has such a strong memory of his past life and will talk about it as though it just happened. Really, as though there was no pause, even though he was in a completely different body, he talks about it and remembers his past life as though it was something that happened earlier on in this life. The continuity to him, it's unbroken. Whereas Mikey, there's no continuity. Like, Mikey doesn't remember the spirit world at all. Mikey doesn't have, Mikey's understanding of the spirit world is in the spirits that he can physically perceive because he's so sensitive. But Mikey doesn't ask questions about the afterlife or what happens when he dies. Just to talk about for animal communication practice, one of the common reasons why people will consult an animal communicator, it's often when the human is having to make end-of-life decisions for their loving pet. So I have talked to hundreds, it might even be getting into the thousand or so. I've been doing this for so long now. So many animals who are in their last months of life, and their human is wanting to make a decision. They're wanting to know, does the animal, is my pet in pain? Do they understand that they're dying? Do they know what will happen when they're dying? Should I book a euthanasia appointment? Do they want to die at home naturally? So there's that whole conversation. And what I've learned in talking to all of these animals over the years is that each individual animal is different. Some of them completely understand what dying is, and they have complete confidence that when they're ready, they will be able to leave their body on their own, or if they feel stuck, they will communicate with their humans, and it's going to be very, very clear. And on the other extreme of the spectrum, we've got animals like Mikey who don't really have an intellectual concept of death, and it's because they don't have much of an intellectual concept of time. Most animals have an awareness of passing time, but there are the rare individuals like my beautiful Mikey who exists solely in the moment to moment, and they don't think about the future, and they don't really think about the past. And sometimes when they have memories, it's as though it's happening in the present for them. Their experience of time is very different. And so explaining their illness to them and explaining the death process to an animal who is experiencing a consciousness life, or a phase of consciousness like Mikey is experiencing, explaining that and the death process to those animals is very different. I mean, you really don't need to explain the death process to an animal like Rupert, who is aware of it, who remembers that time in between when he died as Snowball and was hanging around and traveling around with my partner as her spirit animal. He never left her side, and then when the opportunity came, he reincarnated as her kitten, and he's so happy to be back. He loves being alive again, and he's really enjoying it. And he chose not to. He chose to opt out of that amnesia. All humans, almost all humans, when we incarnate, we opt into that amnesia, because that's a part of the human experience, is that separation from our spiritual reality. That's a part of what makes this life challenging. Now, some humans are intuitively tied into the spiritual. Often these are people that are, drawn to spiritual work, similar to me, or they're drawn to helping healing industries, and they often don't feel the need to really prove themselves. They just simply live it. And I like reading the autobiographies of some nuns. Never really retire, but I like reading autobiographies of women that have devoted their lives to faith and to work, and so have had that experience with spirituality and with the individual who they call God, the spirit consciousness that they call God, and the absolute trust that they have. And these individual nuns, or like these women who have come to mind, their relationship with their spirit guides, it's very different. It's more companionable because they go directly to God, and they're dealing with, they're coping with their lives by accepting a lot of the challenges that comes with this service under the umbrella of a very restrictive religion. But they devote their lives to the good that they do, and they might devote their lives to childcare, to teaching, to nursing, as many nuns did. And in our culture, we have kind of negative connotations of nuns in these roles, because some nuns could be very abusive, and that's become notorious in our culture. But there were, there are many nuns who were genuinely good, loving, divine people who lived out their lives just giving. And I really admire that way of life in a lot of ways. So back to animals and spirit guides, I do want to back up a little bit. We've been talking a lot about cats, but I do want to talk about dogs, because this is something that's come up in the animal communication practice with several times. It tends to come up when we're dealing with a particular purebred dog. Because just like I was talking about how that Bengali tiger is reincarnating along the genetic lines, and she has the instincts and the knowledge that she needs to survive, when you have a purebred dog, you've got a purebred Belgian Shepherd. And this is a breed that has existed for a couple of hundred years. We've got breeds that go back thousands of years. You will frequently see an individual consciousness reincarnating over and over and over again as a shepherd, because they again, it's the tasks, the jobs that they were born to do, they are born knowing how to do. And it's not just their instinct, it's that they've been reincarnating along that same genetic line. And by the way, people do this too. We incarnate, not everybody has to, but I do see people reincarnating along their same genetic line, people who were their own, for example, I think that I am my own great-grandmother, which is I will never know for sure until my time has come and I have passed. I will never know for sure, or I feel like I will never be satisfied until I've had that completely unbiased, unattached view of my life. But that's my suspicion based on some dreams and some meditations that I've done, and the relationship that I have with different family members. It kind of makes sense to me. So that's something that I am open to. But what's come up in sessions for people is that they've been their own great aunts, great uncles. It seems to be 3 or 4 generations up. Although I have also seen an individual who died very suddenly, and it was a horrific accident and it was never intended. And this was a person who did not have a chance to begin really working on their life plan yet. The body was just gone in an instant. We have spirit guides, we have, angels and protectors and ancestors who do everything they can. But I mean, sometimes accidents happen, and sometimes deaths are unintended. And so this individual reincarnated, as his sister's child. So as his own nephew. And this was arranged on a spiritual level. The sister, on a higher self level, agreed, I will have one additional child. And the child who was going to be her firstborn child agreed to step aside so that this individual who had died accidentally, could immediately jump back in and be in that family environment and live through childhood again. Going back, explaining how long it takes children to reach maturity. I mean, this young man was not yet 20. He was just beginning his adult life. And many people don't really begin their life's work until they're in their 20s and 30s. Oftentimes, childhood experiences are about building the foundations that they need, the foundational experiences, whether it's challenging, whether it's supportive, it's about building their personality. And that is going to inform the actual work that they do as adults when they spend the majority of their life as adults. So here he was just on the cusp of beginning his life plan, and bam, he had to do childhood all over again. So that's part of the reason why every individual human needs a spirit guide, because so much time and energy gets invested in a human child because it takes so long. And all of us come through with life plans of some sort, whether it is an open-ended life plan to help and to heal, or whether even if it's very specific, some people come through with life plans that are, a library worth of choreographed events with individuals. So it's, the concept of life plan varies quite a bit as well. So when all of that energy has gone in to coordinate a lifetime worth of experiences, a life plan to-do list that needs to be checked off, and then somebody loses their body to, a sudden terrible accident, or even to a disease that just was randomly activated genetically. I mean, that's a tragedy on a spiritual level as well. And so things can get moved around, things can get accelerated so that a person's reincarnation can be expedited. And this seems to be one of the reasons why we like to incarnate along genetic lines, because being able to approximate that childhood that was just lost, being able to approximate that childhood becomes easier when it's within the same family unit, the same culture, the same environment. So that's, one of the reasons really why we need spiritual guides. And one of the things that can happen when unexpected tragedy strikes. When you're looking at a wild animal who, we'll go back to our Bengali tiger, if she doesn't survive her kittenhood, if she makes a mistake and, falls into the river and drowns, for example, then her mother goes into heat again later that year, and she is reincarnated. In less than a year, she's reincarnated, and she is in an extremely similar body, genetically a very similar body, in the same environment with the same mother in the same kind of place. The variables are very similar. So the stakes are not as high for wild animals, and the cause of death is like the cause of death and the time of death is a lot more flexible for wild animals, because that's the nature of participating in an ecosystem. There's a willingness to do that, and there's a lot more flexibility. So for example, now I'm going to go to wolf pups. Say, there's 3 pups that's born to a wolf pack, and one pup doesn't survive to adolescence. So now we've got 2 pups. Well, that 3rd pup who passed, she's going to come back in the next batch of pups. And the 2 pups that survived to adolescence, one of them doesn't survive the winter. So by the time next year rolls around, one of those 3 pups have survived, but the other 2 are reincarnating right back into the family. They're taking another crack at it. And nothing is lost to those pups who died very early on in their lives. They're coming right back in. They're going to be just as joyful, and they're going to also bring the experiences with them they come through as pups that are slightly more experienced, and they know, well, maybe I need to compete harder for some of the food that's brought home, or I need to behave in a more appealing manner. I need to concentrate my attachment to the older dogs more, or to to the dominant male a little more, or there's wolf lives are socially complex. It's really beautiful, and but when an individual in a wolf pack passes, there is an opportunity for them to come back immediately. They reach maturity again very quickly. By the time they're 2 years old, they're beginning to participate in pack hunts, so they can recover a lot quicker than a human who dies before they really reach that adult level of independence. And this isn't to say that when a member of a wolf pack dies that it's not consequential. I mean, when a significant member of a wolf pack, a leader or a really wise senior who has shown incredible value in helping to raise the pups, I mean, these individuals that do survive within wolf packs, that reach maturity and get to live past 5 years of age, they become such an integral part of that wolf family that, of course, it is a massive loss, and that the pack dynamics shift. And wolf packs will have relationships with neighboring wolf packs, and there's politics that happens between that. So I am not in any way downplaying the importance of the life of an individual wild animal. What I'm talking about, what I'm showing and explaining, is that these individual animals don't have the need for individual spirit guides the way that humans often do, because as complex, as beautiful, as complicated, as challenging as wild animal lives are, there is still more overall consistency, and there's also less that they can individually do. They have less individual choices than humans do. And so humans need a lot of guidance. Animals also don't ask themselves questions like, do I have a spirit guide? Animals don't have spiritual crises often. Like even as animals have spiritual experiences, they aren't judging it. They're just accepting everything that happens. Animals very rarely go through questions in their mind like why. Even as humans encroach on their territory and affect their lives, it's very rare that animals will go through this kind of a tortured, why do humans do this to us? I've had wild birds actually ask, why are people doing this? Why are people tearing down this perfectly good berry patch that our family has been eating from for hundreds of years, for thousands of years? Why are the humans destroying this. And sometimes the birds will even show me the ancient humans of the area used to cultivate these berry patches and used to build it up. And so why are the humans tearing this down? And I will show, well, they're going to build human houses. And the birds find that very confusing because these human houses don't provide them with food. And so these birds feel confused by it, and they're losing a food source as these berry patches get, mowed down because human urban development just continues to sprawl even out here in the very rural Ucluelet-Tofino area. But there's not a sense of spiritual crisis around it. Why would the bird gods let humans do this? They don't ask those kinds of existential questions, but humans, part of our nature is to ask these questions. And that's another reason why we need individual guides. We need that one-to-one attention because we've got that combination of the self-awareness and our highly developed prefrontal cortex, our logical brains, asking these spiritual crisis questions, and we're born with this amnesia, this cutoff, this block. Most of us will have some type of a separation from our consciousness that resides within our bodies to the consciousness that we are when we are outside of our bodies. And we practice meditation. We can do all kinds of things to reconnect with that. But for most of us, what we experience when we are going about our daily lives, it's a different kind of consciousness than what we have when we have released our bodies and we're on the other side. Our brains are wonderful and they give us this human experience. Our brains give us the ability to process these physical sensations that we experience. But our brains also give us the anxiety and the existential crisis questions. And that's a part of the human experience too. Believe it or not, that's a big part of why we come through here. We don't experience spiritual existential crises when we're an energetic consciousness. So that is the hour-long response to question 1 of 3 of Carrie's fantastic questions that she has as a result of her first run through the course, which is telepathic communication with animals and spirit. You can enroll in this course if you like by clicking the link in this podcast episode, or you can visit tofinopsychic.com/class. You can always email me if you have any questions that you would like me to address in a future podcast. Or my wonderful student friends listening to this as I upload this to your program. As I upload this answer to this question, everyone who is enrolled in the course is going to get an email linking them to this file, and it will also link them to the audio files addressing Carrie's other 2 questions. And I look forward to this upload inspiring many more questions from the people that are taking this program. So if you are not yet enrolled in telepathic communication with animals and spirit, and you are intrigued and you are interested, please feel free to check it out, tofinopsychic.com/class. And if you have any questions about it, please feel free to email me, tofinopsychic@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us for this portion of the question and answer period. And thank you for joining us on the Joyful Telepathy podcast, if that's where you're listening to this file. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll talk to you again soon. That's it for this episode of the Joyful Telepathy podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to book a session with me, click on the link in this episode's description or visit tofinopsychic.com. And you, my dear listener, please use coupon code PODCAST. That's coupon code podcast for $20 off your first session. Until next time, be well and take care of each other.